On today's Locked On Jayhawks, 4 bold predictions about KU football before the season heading into preseason camp.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and you can tune into the show. It's called Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be going over 4 bold predictions for KU football this upcoming season ahead of football preseason camp, which is coming up here in less than a month. We'll also get to our Mass Street, which is the basketball tournament team with Frank Mason, Thomas Robinson, and others in our TBT preview for Mass Street coming up later in the show. Thank you to the everydayers tuning into each and every show. Thank you for making this your first listen every day. And we are brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we're going to start with our full 4 bold predictions, and then we'll move into our Mass Street TBT preview. Let's start with prediction number 1 for the KU football season. Despite losing Austin Booker, and I guess you could say others on the defense and the defensive line and really everywhere, Kansas's defense will improve to a top 50 unit nationally. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge, bold prediction to throw out there, right? Of this, top 50, there's 130 teams. Like, what's the big deal? Well, that would be a sizable increase for Kansas from where they were a season ago. Kansas was 67th in points allowed per game last season. They were 69th in yards allowed per game last season. They were 74th in yards allowed per play last season. And on ESPN SP Plus's defensive efficiency ranking, they were 62nd to finish last year. So if you are finishing in the top 50, that's a sizable increase. That's, 15, 20 spots, depending on which of those numbers you're kind of looking at, 25 spots in another case there. And it gets even, I think, more of a bold prediction when you consider, okay, they lost Austin Booker, who was arguably their most impactful defensive player. I mean, you could say Kobe Bryant or Melo Dotson or, a couple other players that you would throw out there. But I think just in general, the pass rush becomes so important. Regardless, he is one of the most impactful defensive players in the Big 12, you could say, the season ago. You lost him. You lost Devin Phillips, who was your best defensive tackle from a season ago, right? You lost a couple starting linebackers. You lost Kenny Logan, who was a long-term impact player and starter for you on the defense. When you lose all that, do you really expect to not just get better, but make a sizable jump to get better? Well, I think it can and will happen for this upcoming Kansas team because I love the defensive backs. I love the secondary, right? You bring back Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson. Those are 2 guys who can be locked down, who are already all Big 12 a season ago. And now you have another year of experience, of weight gain, of improving your craft in the system. The things should only get better. I think Marvin Grant is in for a breakout season this year. I guess he kind of had a breakout season last year, but I think more notoriety will be around Marvin Grant this year because, without Kenny Logan in the back end, Kenny Logan got the most, I think, notoriety of the back end for Kansas. I think it'll be more Marvin Grant this year, and he'll get more realization of just how good he is. And then you have O.J. Burrows, who I think, 2 years ago had a good season. Last year had some ups and downs if you look like the Pro Football Focus rating, but I think is a good player. I think he'll have a good year in his senior season. And so I love the DBs. I love the depth of the DBs, right? I mean, that backup safety unit could be starting for you in another year, and I would feel comfortable with that, right? You look at the backup corners, you've been recruiting that position really good. I think Jamil Croft is going to be an absolute stud. So I love the DBs. That should give Brian Borland even more freedom to kind of help the loss at the line of scrimmage, to help the loss of Austin Booker and Devin Phillips, that you should feel more comfortable sending a 5th guy, sending 6 guys on a blitz on a given play because you have a trusted back end of the secondary. I'm also a believer that the linebacker core is going to be a solid amount better than it was a season ago. I think Rich Miller maxed out on what he could be for Kansas and gets a lot of credit for being a good leader and helping usher in this new era of the program. And I think was exactly what KU needed on that defense. Somebody who transferred over from Buffalo, was a good team player, was a leader, helped really things come along for KU. But if we're just talking from a pure talent standpoint, like Cornell Wheeler is a more talented linebacker than Rich Miller. J.B. Brown is a more talented linebacker than, what you had at that position a season ago. I guess Craig Young was ultra talented, but kind of different there. I expect the linebacking core to actually be better than it was a season ago. And so if you have this back end, you have the linebacking core, it's just about, can you get enough from the D line? Obviously, no Austin Booker, who was so impactful on the D line, and Devin Phillips too, who's really good, makes this that maybe it ends up being no, but can you get at least close to it? And I actually think that in the same way that I think that the linebackers are maybe being unheralded a little bit here, I do think that's the case with the defensive tackles. Like I mean, you've seen progression each year from DJ Withers and Tommy Dunn. There's no reason not to believe that they're not going to take at least another small jump this season. You brought in a transfer in Javier Garrett, who's going to help with some experience on that defensive, on the interior of that defensive line. Caleb Taylor has kind of taken some real steps in the program so far. I mean, you feel good about those four. Keenan Caldwell, right? Like, there's another guy you can throw out. I feel good about the D tackles. I even feel good about strong defensive end, like Jeremy Robinson and Dylan Woodkey at a strong defensive end spot. That's a good rotation. It's just about the weak defensive end spot. And you clearly have talent. Like Dak Brinkley, Deshaun Warner, By Jobe, Dean Miller, Dylan Brooks. Like, you arguably have more just pure talent, like 1 through 3, 1 through 5 in that depth chart. It's just are all those players going to be ready right away? But even if that defensive line isn't as good in like the pass rush that you had in Austin Booker, Austin Booker wasn't like a great run defender. I don't think he was bad. He probably just like an average run defender who was a great pass rusher. And so at the very least, if this defensive line can just be better against the run, and you're better at linebacker, and you're better at the back end, and your D-line's at least better against the run, even if they're not as good in pass rush, well, you're also going to set yourself up in more situations where A, you have a trusted back end so you can blitz, and B, if you're better against the run, you're going to be in more 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12. And on those situations, it's a little bit easier to pass rush for that defensive line because they can just kind of pin their ears back. Plus, you have another year in the system with Brian Borland. And while it's not that I think this is like the most complex system or the best system around in college football, like, continuity doesn't hurt. And let's not forget, when you go back to Buffalo, by points allowed versus points scored, Brian Borland, the defensive coordinator, outperformed the offensive side of the ball at Buffalo when Lance Leipold was there in 4 of the 6 seasons. So they actually had the better defense than the offense in 4 of 6 seasons at Buffalo. And that included having a top 50 scoring defense in 2017, a top 30 scoring defense in 2019, and 2020 as well, top 30, with 2020 not even being one of those seasons where the defense was better. So I do think there is a little bit of undersold there. And I think this is something that absolutely can happen. And I think that would be one thing that would help you take that step to possibly winning a Big 12 title, right? Your offense has been really good these last 2 years. Maybe you can take a little step up by Jalen Daniels being healthy. Like, that's one area, or just, certain areas that you can get a little bit better on offense, but there's not much better you can get on offense. You've been a top 20 offense the last couple of years. Can your defense make the jump? Can your special teams make the jump? And I think the defense can make at least enough of a jump there. Prediction number 2 here. Luke Grimm will be just the 3rd Jayhawk to have double-digit receiving touchdowns in a single season. That college football 25 grade, it's going to go up from an 81 if this ends up happening. That's for sure. So only 2 players in KU's program history have had double-digit receiving touchdowns in a single season. You have Desmond Briscoe, who had 15 of them back in the 2008 season. You had Marcus Henry, who had 10 of them for the Orange Bowl team, which was the 2007 season, and then the 08 Orange Bowl. So I think Grimm can become that 3rd guy. Since 2022, this is a stat we went over in one of our past episodes. If you're an everydayer, you listen to this. Games where Jalen Daniels started and finished the game. That's about 11 and a half games, or you can just call it 11 games because the TCU game, right, that he got injured in 2022. Luke Grimm, in those games that Jalen Daniels started the last 2 seasons and finished the game, has led Kansas in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. This was obviously a touchdown-related bold prediction, but I think that's what's interesting here. So in that span, he has 6 touchdowns, which is 11 starts. So if you're talking about if Jalen can go, if you have a Big 12 championship game, if you have a bowl game, that's 14 games, right? To where that would allow you to get up a little bit more. But even if you don't have a Big 12 championship game, if you have a bowl game, that's 13 games. So you'd have to up the per game number there a little bit. But what is interesting, 6 in that span. Quentin Skinner in that span, 1. Lawrence Arnold in that span, 1. It's pretty clear who Jalen Daniels trusts in the red zone. And one of the other most trusted guys in the red zone, Mason Fairchild, is no longer there. Now, Devin Neal's going to get a lot of, rushing touchdowns, but I think Jalen, you're going to see him, take less rushing chances at the red zone to take hits. Like maybe that means more passing touchdowns in those situations because you don't want to get injured there. He clearly trusts Luke Grimm in the end zone. I think both players' numbers could go up this year. I'm going to say he gets to 10. All right, let's continue on with two more bold predictions, and then we'll get into our Mass Street TBT preview. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. I love sports, love them so much, never want them to stop. And right now, it kind of feels like with the playoffs winding down, Copa's over, the Euros are over, that's kind of the case here. And the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can get in on the Open, or if you don't want to be hoity-toity, you can call it the British Open this week. You got golf tournaments going all season long. You can get in your future bets. You've been reading your college football magazines. You've been listening to this show. You've been listening to our Locked On Network, checking out other shows. You want to bet the over, the under on somebody's win total. You can do that at FanDuel too. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the Locked On Podcast Network. Continuing on, thank you to our everydayers tuning into each and every show. And don't forget, you can check out all sorts of stuff on our Locked On Podcast Network. Like I said, if you want to, check out what's going on with all of KU's opponents this year, maybe just some of their early opponents like West Virginia and Illinois, we got shows for that. We don't have a show for Lindenwood, unfortunately, so I can't really help you out with that one, but we have plenty of useful information throughout our Locked On Podcast Network. All right, prediction number 3, bold prediction number 3 for the upcoming KU football season, as we are a little less than a month away from KU football preseason camp. Prediction number 3, Logan Brown will be Kansas's best offensive lineman. So I've been hesitant with this one because he is coming off an injury, and not just an injury, a very serious injury, one that kept him out for the rest of the season after he suffered it a year ago. And if not for Calvin Clemens suffering an injury back in spring ball, like I don't know who would have been the favorite to start, to be completely honest with you. I still lean Logan Brown because he would have been the more experienced guy. And even though we saw Clemens start in the bowl game, Logan Brown wasn't available, right? But maybe it would have been Calvin Clemens would have been the favorite to start a tackle. So I don't know. That makes this a little bit tougher. But regardless of how we got here, this would be high praise because you have an absolute stud guard in Michael Ford. He graded out as one of the top 5 guards on Pro Football Focus in the Big 12 a season ago. I think he was an 87 on College Football 25, the newest video game. You got a multi-year starter in Bryce Cable at right tackle. You got Bryce Foster, who has 28 games started at the SEC level, transferring over from Texas A&M. Then you have whoever you start at the other guard spot, which I would lean toward being Kobe Baines right now, who's a good player. But, if not, you have some other good options there that you could go with. So, I mean, it's bold to say that, I guess, at the very least. Brown, though, has the highest ceiling of the group. Now, will the ceiling be actualized, right? Because there's a difference between what gets actualized in the season and what is your ceiling, what is your overall potential of where you're going to get to. But when you look at the body, you look at the athleticism, you look at the prospect pedigree, you look at even what he did in his past stop at Wisconsin, more limited snaps and never put together a full season, but you see the potential there. And I think it also helps that for me to say this, he does play the most important of the offensive line positions. I guess you could argue center, they touch the ball every play. And maybe nowadays, left tackle and right tackle are becoming more homogenous to where, teams aren't just putting their best pass rusher on the blind side of the quarterback, right? They're kind of lining them up all over, having them play either edge side, but still left tackle typically is the most important offensive line position. Let's not forget, his Pro Football Focus grades have excelled, though, was Logan Brown. So he went from being a 5-star offensive tackle out of high school to playing 58 snaps as a freshman, only a 47 grade, to then 70 snaps in year 2 at Wisconsin, goes up to a 68.8 grade on PFF, to then in year 3, his final year at Wisconsin, he had a 69.2 grade, which I also don't know why it's only a 69.2 because what are the 2 things you do as an offensive lineman? You run block and you pass block. He had a 70.5 run block. He had a 70.6 pass block. I don't know how that got dropped down to 69.2. You'd think it would be between those two. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, point being, basically a 70 overall. And then in 9 snaps for KU last season, very small sample size, but he did have a 77.3. So, that's certainly a positive. But let's talk about that final year at Wisconsin. That's 209 snaps, 70.5 run block grade. That would have been third among KU offensive linemen in 2023, only behind Dom Pooney, NFL draft pick, and Michael Ford. His 70.6 pass block grade would have ranked higher than Bryce Cable. It would have ranked higher than Armaj Reed Adams. It would have ranked higher than Mike Nowitzki. It would have ranked higher than Calvin Clements. I think Michael Ford, to me, is the most known commodity and kind of the highest floor here. Like, Michael Ford has the best chance of being your best offensive lineman this season. But if you're saying that everybody reaches their potential, then it's either Bryce Foster or Logan Brown in terms of who has the highest potential, I think, on the team on the offensive line. And I think in the same way, maybe this is a bit of the hope. I remember Kobe Bryant got injured in that Oklahoma game back when they played down in Norman in 2022. And the staff kind of talked about in the weeks to come after that when Kobe was out and missing practices and stuff like that they had never seen him kind of work as hard and chomp at the bit. Not that he wasn't working hard, but there's a different level between guys who work hard and guys who make it their lifestyle. You know what I mean? Like, there's a jump there. And that the injury kind of made him realize how much he loved the game and missed even being away from it for just, a couple days of practice or a couple weeks, whatever it ended up being. I don't remember how long he was out for. And that kind of, propelled him to a whole new level, was kind of what happened there with Kobe Bryant. And you wonder if that can happen with Logan Brown, that missing the season with the injury last year can all of the sudden, give him new, because, he loses out, or it seemed like he was going to lose out on the tackle job that they were going to play, what they ended up doing with Pooney and Cable do. And you wonder if this gives him like a new renewed spark in some way. And boy, would that be impactful for KU if that ends up being the case. All right, fourth and final prediction here. Kansas will have as many or more NFL draft picks as the Orange Bowl squad. So the 2007 squad, that would have been the 2008 NFL draft. I actually went back and looked. The record based on my findings for the most NFL draft picks by a KU team. You want to guess this? I'll give you a second. 1977. Ding, ding, ding. They had 6 draft picks in the 1977 draft. The second most was 1975. They had 5 of them. Man, they were just producing. And to be clear, when I looked at these draft picks, I was only counting the top 7 rounds. There's actually years where they had like 1953, they had 7 guys drafted, but some of them were in the 12th rounds, the 13th round, the 22nd, the 26th rounds. 1957, they had 7 drafted, but all of them were between rounds 11 and 30. I don't know, maybe that does count because there were less teams involved, so the picks maybe equates more simply. But I only looked, so I should clarify this. I only am basing these numbers off the first 7 rounds of the draft, since that's what it is now. And if you go by top 7 round picks, 6 in 1977, 5 in 1975, you have 4 in 1969, 1974. Again, those 70s, you're just producing. All of them are in the top 3 rounds in 74 too. 1976, 1986, 1996, and then 2008 NFL draft. So that was the Orange Bowl year with 4 NFL draft picks. So I think Devin Neal and Kobe Bryant, you look at both those guys, they're projected to be draft picks, and not just like draft picks where it's like, oh, they're hanging on. They could be a 6th round pick. Maybe they end up falling out. It's like, no, they're both set to be secure draft picks as long as everything goes to plan this year. Right. Mello Dotson, I think, has a good chance of being drafted, especially if he, continues to build off what he's done last season, especially over the back half of the year. So you got 2 you feel great about. You got 1 you probably feel pretty good about in Mello. If Jalen Daniels stays healthy and balls out, I think he would go. I think that's the intention for him, and I think he would get picked. If he doesn't stay healthy, he's going to have a decision to make about coming back to school, or do you end up going to the draft and whatever. I feel like that decision would kind of be made for him in that situation. What if you stay healthy and you have just an average season? Then that becomes probably the most middle ground. But Jalen Daniels does have a chance to get drafted for sure. Then you have the potential bucket where probably not everyone hits their ceiling at once. Like, I talk about this with basketball all the time. Like, you get enamored with this idea in the offseason of, oh, this player's great and this player's great, and that player's a 5-star recruit, and this player was, averaging 15 points per game in his previous stop. And not everybody hits their ceiling or fits into their new role perfectly right away. But some guys, it takes a little bit longer than others. Some guys are going to hit their potential next year. Some will be this year, right? But out of the bucket of players of Logan Brown, Bryce Cable, Michael Ford, Bryce Foster, KU's 3 starting receivers, Jeremy Robinson, Marvin Grant, I think you have a chance to get 1 or 2 of those drafted. I don't know which ones it would be, probably whoever excels the most. And obviously, if you win more games, you're going to get more players drafted. There's going to be more eyeballs on you. And also, that means those players are having good seasons to propel you to have higher heights from a team perspective. So how possible is it to get at least 4? I think it's very possible. You're already feeling good with 2 with Devin Neal and Kobe Bryant. I feel good with 3 with Melo Dotson. Can you get 1 or 2 more from that other group of players with Jalen Daniels and that group I just named? I think absolutely. So, yeah, I think that kind of shows you that this team has a lot of talent on the roster. All right, let's finish up here. Mass Street TBT preview for the upcoming basketball tournament. Welcome back to Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back on Friday for a Football Friday. We're going to reevaluate the class of 2021, which featured Devin Neal as kind of the headliner there. And then we'll take a look at KU football's ratings on EA Sports College Football 25, as we'll be 41 days away from the KU opener against Lindenwood. Finishing up this episode, Mass Street is the basketball tournament team, TBT for short. If you're new to this, it's a 64-team tournament that they have during the summer. I've loved this event since the onset, and it's been something that even when there hasn't been a KU team, I've really gotten into it. But it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of former like college players that you'll recognize that maybe didn't have like NBA careers, but have been playing overseas, and you'll watch it and go, oh, I remember him in college. Like there's a team Kansas could play in the second round with Kenny Boynton, like the former Florida guard who's really good. Like it's players like that. And I think there's a lot of fun stuff. And you see these guys who have gone overseas and they're so much better at basketball now than they were in college, even when they were good players in college, because they've just been doing that for a career. So it's a lot of fun. And the winner gets $1 million, the winning team, and stuff like that. So Mass Street, this is their second year of entering this team. There's been a self-made team before. There's been other teams like Team FOE that have had like the Morris twins on it and like KU players on it, but it hasn't been like a KU specific team. And, maybe there's only 3 or 4 KU players on it or something, or former KU players on it. But this year they are the 2 seed in the Wichita region. Last year they were in the Wichita region and they made it to the round of 16. They won their first game. Then they beat the Missouri team in the second round. And then they lost in the regional final for Wichita, which was basically like the round of 16, to Team Heartfire. And Team Heartfire was the team who won it all. Now this year, Team Heartfire is setting up in a different region. And the 1 seed is with Aftershocks, which is the Wichita State alumni. So they're the home team hosting here, and they've typically won a couple games, sometimes even more than that each and every year. So in the first game, Mass Street is getting Ram Up. That's a Colorado State alumni team. I didn't really recognize many of the names on the team, but I'm sure they have some players who are talented that are, tearing it up in EuroLeague for all I know. But if they win that, they play either Florida TNT or LA Cheaters. Both of them have some real dudes, some who had like some NBA cups of coffee or have done well in this event. But as far as what's on the roster for Mass Street, they're going to be coached by Sharon Collins. Tyshawn Taylor's the assistant coach. Travis Relaford is the GM. And the roster is, this is the best edition of it. If you're viewing last year's Mass Street, if you're viewing the self-made team, I think between this team and those two, this is by far the best roster because you got Frank Mason. That certainly helps. Former National Player of the Year, is going to be playing in this event down in Wichita. You also have Travis Washington at point guard. Every year, like even the alumni teams usually add a couple guys who are, they call them like grad transfers in this that are not actually but he is, I guess, from the state of Kansas in a way because he played at Coffeyville Community College in addition to Utah Valley. But he averaged like 12.5 points per game, almost 6 assists per game in like the German second league last year. So, he's producing pretty well. So those would be your point guards. LeGerald Vick is listed as a point guard, but I would more count him as a wing. You have him, Ben McLemore, which that'll be interesting. I don't know what's going on with kind of the legal stuff there. Obviously, Ben McLemore in the past was somebody who, with the Rock Chalk Roundball Classic, was somebody who was, I guess, giving to that event more than like basically every other player, like it meant in a very real way. So every interaction I've had with Ben has been in a very good way, but obviously I don't know what's going on with the off the court stuff that's going on there. And I don't know if that's being settled or what, because at one point he was on the roster, then he was off, now he's back on. So maybe that's a clear sign of where things are going there, which would be good news. Sam Cunliffe is on the roster. Yeah, there's the name. Brandon Rush. I don't know how much he's going to play, but he should be able to give a couple threes off the bench. And then there's a couple fours there, or forwards that can play the 3 or the 4. Chandler Lawson, who had like a 5-year college career, younger brother of Dedric Lawson. Billy Preston. How about that name? That's a blast from the past. I think KU fans would actually be really excited to like actually see this happen with Billy Preston after they never really got to see him at KU outside of like an exhibition game. But then last year there was that because I've seen a lot of people being like unhappy with Billy Preston being on the roster. And the reason why isn't because of what happened when he was at KU and that he got ousted by the NCAA. It's what happened like a year ago when him and his mom like did that. It was like an interview or like an all-inclusive or something like that, where they kind of were throwing KU under the bus a little bit there. So I found that a little bit interesting that he ended up on the roster, but talented player you add to it. And then the 4 and the 5 men are pretty solid with some star power up front. Thomas Robinson, Dedric Lawson, and then you got good depth with Jamari Traylor, Kevin Young, and Silvio De Sosa, who Silvio was just playing in the Greek League last season, which is certainly a high-level league. So I'm assuming the starting 5 is going to be like Frank, LeGerald Vick, Ben McLemore, Dedric Lawson, Thomas Robinson. Maybe Billy Preston ends up starting instead of like Vic or McLemore. Again, I don't know with the off the court stuff. And then they go Brandon Rush, maybe even over Vic or something like that, unless you want to go with the youth. I don't know. Either way, it might not have as much depth as or like punch as you might have hoped when the roster first came out, because Marcus Garrett was supposed to play, Malik Newman was supposed to play, but it's still a really good team. The star power of Frank, T-Rob, McLemore, and Dedric, like, to me, that's one of the best top 4s, if not the best top 4 in this entire tournament. And last year, like, T-Rob helped will his way with some of these others into the round of 16. They didn't really have the guard play, and not all of that was their fault. They had a couple good guards that they had to the roster, but then they ended up having to opt out like the week before the tournament, or in the case like Tyshawn Taylor was supposed to play and give him guard depth, but he I think had an injury that happened like in practice or something. So you ended up not with a ton of true guards, which win in this event. Well, now you got Frank, and you also got Ben McLemore. So I think they can make a deep run, if not win at all. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back for a Football Friday episode of the show coming up tomorrow. Thanks for tuning into the show and making it your first listen every day. We'll see you on Friday.